approval of proceedings of the February 14th meeting. Are there any changes or additions to those minutes? Seeing none, those are adopted as written. Public comment. Are there any people wishing to speak on items that are not on the agenda? The only person I see on the list is a friend and someone that was a pleasure to serve on this commission with in the past, Jerry Cavallo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Winter Flounder Board. My name is Jerry Cavallo. I served on the commission for 4 years. I now represent, I serve as Vice President of the Rhode Island Fishermen's Alliance. Our concern with the winter flounder has to do with access. The feds have taken upon themselves to commandeer, I'm going to use the term commandeer, this fishery. It was traditionally a state waters fishery. The inshore boats, commercial boats, relied probably 40% of their income on this resource. Under the present circumstances, the recreational fishery has been all but completely excluded from access to the resource. The disparity in access is unacceptable from a social standpoint. It goes beyond the issue of fisheries management, either good fisheries management or bad. It becomes a moral issue when one vessel on a dock can come in with 5,000 pounds of fish, and the remaining state vessels can come in with 50 pounds of fish. To put this more simply, one person is given an apple to feed his family, and the other person is given a month's supply of food. That's about as simple as I can make it. This commission is made up of sovereign states. And as sovereign states, you will have a duty and an obligation to protect the resource, but also to protect access to that resource for its state citizens. The feds have taken upon themselves, in my mind, to commandeer this access to this resource. And I think it's wrong, and it raises a moral issue. And I would hope that this board changes those circumstances and makes right what obviously has become a wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Next item on the agenda is the assessment update for Gulf of Maine stock. Paul?
Okay, my name is Paul Mitchke. I work for the Center Population Dynamics Branch. I have the lead on the Gulf of Maine Winter Flounder assessment. This assessment was recently updated in August to an operational update. Georges Bank Winter Flounder was also updated that assessment, and also Pollock. Okay, just to remind everyone where that Gulf of Maine stock is, it's in the 500s. And for statistical areas, most of the stock is being caught in 514. Almost the entire stock is in that one statistical area. For the Southern New England stock, keep in mind that 521 is an important statistical area for that stock. A lot of the catch comes out of that stat area for that stock. Okay, so for the Gulf of Maine assessment, this is one of those model-resistant assessments. Back at GARM 3, the VPA assessment was not accepted for management advice. Then there was another benchmark assessment at SARC 52. Once again, we tried using the VPA model, and we looked at other model frameworks, including the scale model and the ASAP model. However, that At that assessment, it wasn't accepted either, and no modeling went forward. Basically, there's a large conflict between the data trends, there's a large conflict between the reduction in the catch and the trends in the surveys and the age structure in the assessment. So back at SARC 52, there was an appendix where I estimated 30-plus area served biomass from the surveys directly. This ended up becoming the main part of the stock assessment, which was updated in August for the operational assessment. So even though we have big questions with the trends, I'm going to maybe quickly go through the survey trends and the catch trends, since I'm sure people are interested in seeing them. This is the Science Center Spring Index. On top is the abundance, on the bottom is the biomass index. You can see that the trends in this index is very flat, it's very constant over time. Not much change really occurring. This is the fall survey. Once again, fairly flat index over time. However, more recently, we see this decline in the abundance over the last few years, which is a source of concern. This is the Mass Spring survey, also a fairly flat survey. However, more recently, there's been a large decline in the index. In the spring 2014 was the lowest on record for this index. This is the DMF fall survey, and once again, there's this declining trend at the last few years of the survey. Here's the Maine, New Hampshire survey, which starts in 2000. The spring 2014 did show an increase, so there's this large increase in this index in that year, which kind of offsets what we saw in the Mass DMF survey. However, in general, it's a fairly flat survey like the others. A shorter time series, though. So here are the catch trends over time. There's been a large reduction in the catch over the time series. In the 80s, the recreational component was a significant part of the removals. The recreational fishery has almost disappeared for winter flounder. The discards are also a very minor component of the catch. So more recently, we see catches around 300 tons in the last decade or so. This is very small compared to the removals that we saw in the 1980s. So the new assessment now uses the surveys directly. There's several improvements in the surveys which allow this. Now we have the Bigelow survey, which has a higher catchability. When the Bigelow came on board, we also have improved sampling of the inshore strata in the NIMS survey. We also now have information from the Maine, New Hampshire survey for inshore strata. So basically, this is how the assessment is done. This is the estimating exploitable biomass. Exploitable biomass was defined as 30-plus centimeter fish from the surveys. So it is simply taking that 30-plus biomass index and multiplying it by an expansion factor, which is just the total survey divided by the total footprint of the survey, divided by Q. So Q here, you can think of Q as the efficiency of the tow in the survey between the wing spreads. At SARC 52, we used a Q of 0.6 as the best estimate of the efficiency. This was informed from the Georges Bank winter flounder assessment at that time. So exploitable biomass is simply estimated as the catch over the 30-plus biomass index. So one of the issues with the Gulf of Maine assessment is we don't have a survey that covers the entire stock. So we ended up putting 3 different surveys together to cover the stock. We have the NIMS survey, which covers the offshore strata and parts of Mass and Cape Cod Bay. The Mass DMF survey covers areas close to shore where where the NIM survey can't get into. So those straight along the coast. And then for straight to north of Massachusetts, we used the Maine, New Hampshire survey. You can see from this map that that's a large area. However, there are not that many 30-plus centimeter fish caught in that survey. So these are the numbers that go into that equation. The top row is the survey area, and then the footprint for each survey, and then the expansion factor, just dividing the total area by the footprint. Biological reference points were not updated at the operational update since there's limited new information for this. These were estimated from a length-based yield per recruit model using F40. These were later converted to exploitation rates since the assessment is done in exploitation terms. To keep it consistent with the way the index is, we use a knife edge selectivity at 30 centimeters for the length-based yield per recruit. So here are the biomass estimates coming out of the surveys. On the top is the spring survey, on the bottom is the fall survey. The different colors represent the different surveys. So you can see in the spring, a greater chunk of the stock is within the state surveys. This makes sense because in the spring, the fish are closer to shore, and a certain chunk of the population is probably within the estuaries, since that's when spawning occurs. So at SARC 52, it was thought that the fall survey was a better estimate of the total biomass, since the spring survey could be missing some fish, since we don't have any surveys that go inside the estuaries. So the 2010 fall estimate was used for the stock assessment at that time. However, since then, you can see the biomass index has declined, pretty much been cut in half since the last assessment in the fall. Whereas the spring survey is more stable. More recently, the two surveys are producing very similar results. So uncertainty was estimated using this Latin hypercube approach. Remember, we have different surveys going into the estimate, so we have uncertainty around each survey. We have uncertainty around each of the footprint in each survey. Paul Rago has some code that does this. It basically takes each of these uncertainty distributions and chunks them up into equal probability intervals. And then it loops through and finds all possible combinations. So he takes each distribution and chunks them up into 40 equal probability intervals. There's 6 different uncertainty distributions, so that's 40 to 6 possible evaluations. So that's over 4 billion evaluations that the model has to run through. So these are the estimates coming out of that. You can see more recently from 2012 to 2014, the estimates are very similar. The distributions overlap each other. The spring and fall surveys also show very similar results. This plot here basically shows you the uncertainty of the Q assumption, or that efficiency assumption, and the estimates are sensitive to what you assume for that efficiency. So at SARC 52, the SSE looked at these cumulative probability distributions. This is the probability of F exceeding FMSY. The 60% efficiency, which is the line on the right, was used for the OFL determination. So where this line crosses the 50% probability, that was used to determine the OFL, which was at 1458, that assessment. When we update these curves, they move to the left because the biomass was cut in half. And a similar thing was done for the ABC at SARC 52. This is the probability of F exceeding 75% FMSY. The SSE decided to use just a straight control rule at the time, which is the 60%, where the 60% line crosses the 50% probability, which came out to 1078. So not surprising when we update this, they shift to the left since the biomass was cut in half. This plot here basically just shows you the sensitivity of assuming different efficiencies. Looking at the fall survey from 2009 to 2012, the horizontal lines on here are the FMSY and 75% FMSY. So you can see how the changes that occur over time relative to the reference points. So the exploitation rates have increased over time. However, these exploitation rates are still below the overfishing threshold. Back at stock 52, the stock status wasn't overfishing, had a very low exploitation rate. Since then, you can see the exploitation rates have increased, but they're still far below the overfishing definition. So the big question here is, why did the stock decline under such low exploitation rates? One of the sensitivity analyses we did was we used information from the empirical Georges Bank yellowtail assessment, which was recently done. That assessment uses a Q of 0.37 on the door spread. This basically came from the literature. So we want to see if we use these estimates last time at SOC 52, would have that changed anything? But if you would have done that, it still would have produced higher catches than the removals that we observed. So some indication that even if you did use these Q estimates, it wouldn't really have much of an effect, or wouldn't have changed anything. So you can think of a Q of 0.37 on the doors is roughly equal to a Q of 1 on the wing spreads. So the big question in this assessment is, of course, why did the biomass get cut in half under low exploitation rates? This is a plot that was shown to the SSC last week. The brown line on this plot is the catch, historical catch. The black line is the historical ABCs. The first year, 2010, that ABC was based on recent catch history at that time, since the assessment was rejected at GARM 3. And you can see the large increase there is from using the biomass, area swept biomass assessment, which produced that 1078 number. So more recently, when we update those estimates, the numbers drop. The red line on here is the OFL, and the blue line is the ABC. So the ABC now is 510 metric tons. The green line on here, for comparison, is the Georges, if you use the Georges Bank yellowtail Q. However, that's not being used for the ABC determination. That's all I have.
Thank you, Paul. Very thorough report. Any questions? Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any idea as to why, with all the restrictions and regulations that we have on this fishery over the years, why it hasn't recovered and gone up? I mean, you would think that since they have all these quotas, rules, and everything else, that something would have gone up. It apparently isn't the fishing. Do you have any idea, do they have any idea why this stock isn't just bounding back up?
wish I knew the answer to that question. For this stock, the modeling has you have a lot of trouble with the modeling. It's because some of the trends aren't making sense, right? The model can't figure out why there isn't a response in the stock with such a large reduction in the catch over the time series. So the model wants to see some response to that. It wants to see increases in the index or increases in the age and size structure. We just don't see that. This is a similar story for the Southern England stock. However, on Georges Bank, that assessment does show more dynamics, and that stock is in fairly good shape compared to the other two.
Any further questions? Dave?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for the presentation. Interesting statistics. I've never heard of the Latin hypercube approach. I've got to investigate that. I think you said that the Gulf of Maine winter flounder resource, the abundance, the biomass has declined. I think you said that, right? So I just want to confirm that it has declined. I saw some information in your presentation that seemed to contradict each other, but maybe I just didn't focus on it long enough. So the biomass in the Gulf of Maine has declined.
Yeah, so the assessment uses that fall survey, and that fall survey has pretty much been cut in half.
Okay, but the data that you provided, it showed quite often in the slides, fall 2010 being the last year. But I'm having trouble understanding why some of the slides emphasize that fall 2010 was the last year for the analysis, but then updates indicated something different. Could you elaborate a bit?
So at stock 52, the fall 2010 was used. For this assessment, it's the fall 2013, so it's a terminal year in this assessment.
Okay, so, all right. And you also said that since fall 2010, the survey now is being done using different strata. Could you elaborate? I think you said that there are more sampling of the inshore strata. So I guess with more sampling of the inshore strata, I would have expected there have been more positive signs of winter flounder biomass, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
Sorry, I didn't mention that. The fall 2010 was probably a special year, I guess, because in that year the NIM survey wasn't able to finish the survey, and we were missing the important inshore strata for that survey. So for that particular year, we ended up using the Mass DMF survey to fill in those holes. So that's why that year is a little bit different.
Okay, so
but all the other years are consistent.
Okay, thank you. So the Bigelow is sampling inshore strata. This is an important point because I thought that the Bigelow was incapable of sampling the inshore strata the way the Albatross used to. Are you saying then that the Bigelow actually in the Gulf of Maine is adequately sampling the inshore strata that the Albatross did sample before?
Yeah, so in the Gulf of Maine, I think the Bigelow only lost one strata they couldn't go into. It's actually sampling more of the other strata and more toes per stratum.
Okay, thank you. Finally, with Gulf of Maine cod, we've been told quite consistently by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center that the waters are warming in the Gulf of Maine, and potentially that's having an impact on recruitment of codfish. Less recruitment, and here we are with this dire situation with Gulf of Maine cod, due in part to warming of the Gulf of Maine. Is it possible, has the center evaluated whether or not this warming water trend might be having an impact on winter flounder abundance? Because obviously winter flounder tend to seek colder waters, so if it's warming in the Gulf of Maine, is that impacting recruitment success for Gulf of Maine winter flounder? Any information regarding that?
There is some indication in the surveys that the fish are in deeper water when compared to the 1980s. So there's a little bit of an increasing trend in abundance in the deeper waters. thought this might be part of the reason why the assessment is having trouble if we didn't adequately index the stock in the 1980s, because a greater chunk of the stock in the 1980s was outside the survey strata, inside estuaries. I mean, that could be a possible explanation why we're missing something important in the stock assessment.
Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Paul, have you done any probing of the models to see how much under accounting of catch or inflation of natural mortality rate would be required to reconcile the catch trajectories with the abundance behavior? Is that reasonable, plausible explanations, or are they so far out of whack that it's an unrealistic amount of missing catch to reconcile those? In other words, the indices aren't responding to a reduced level of catch, but it's really not reduced that much, or there's another source of mortality.
Yeah, so back at SART 52, this assessment had one of the worst retrospectives, on the order of George's Bank Yellowtail retrospective, and it would require almost an unbelievable amount of catch to explain that.
I'd like to respond to David's question about the warming of the waters. The primary abundance in his report was it's in statistical area 514, which was way warmer than everything up in Maine, as much as 20 degrees. So I think the converse is the case, is that they are not around in the colder waters.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, Paul. Next agenda item, technical committee report. Katie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Correa could not be here today, so I'm going to be giving the Winter Flounder Technical Committee report about the southern New England, Massachusetts, mid-Atlantic stock for the winter flounder. I'm going to be going over basically the winter flounder indices for that part of the stock, and the TC recommendations for the southern New England mid-Atlantic region. So these are the spring biomass indices. I'm going to go through a lot of graphs that are going to look very similar. So this is basically weight per toe, biomass per toe for the Northeast Fisheries Science Center. On top, the Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Jersey, and NEMAP surveys. And as you can see, they remain all very low. The red line, the solid red line on these graphs is the median of the time series, and the dashed lines above and below are the 25th and 75th quartile for these series. So in most cases, they are below the 25th quartile, and in all cases, they are definitely below the time series median. So this is the spring biomass indices. This is the spring abundance indices from the same surveys. Basically, this is numbers of fish per toe, also remains very low. The fall biomass indices that we have include the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, the Massachusetts, and the the NEMAP trawl survey. Again, all very low, below the 25th quartile here in terms of weight per toe, and also in terms of numbers per toe. These are the young of the year indices. So these are the recruitment indices. We put a smooth trend through those to smooth out some of the variability over time. And what you can see is for almost all of these remain very low as well. We see a slight uptick in a couple of the New York surveys, and Massachusetts has seen a little bit of an uptick, but in general, they remain very low. So given this, the TC concluded that almost all the survey indices that we examined are near time series low. And the young of year indices also remain low, despite a couple of upticks in a couple of surveys. And because of this, rebuilding is likely to be slow if it occurs at all, especially with the patterns of recruitment that we've seen in the recent years. So based on that, the recommendations, the TC did not review whatever the SSC's recommendations for the Gulf of Maine stock, so this is just for the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic stock. The specs are likely to remain the same. I don't think we've seen the final numbers yet, but the TC recommends maintaining status quo for this stock, given that the indices indicate no rebuilding has occurred in recent years.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions for Katie? Okay, Mark?
Just point out that the materials that I had anyway didn't have any recruitment indices. That was going to be a question because they were mentioned in the text, but they weren't in the supplemental information, at least I had, but at least I've been able to see those now. The biomass indices and the numbers per tow indices seem to be different in terms of their membership. Rhode Island seems to be not in the biomass index, but then it appears in the numbers per tow, but somebody else must drop out. New Jersey, April drops out. You know what's going on with that? Those don't seem to be a consistent set of surveys.
I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that, I'm not sure that the New Jersey trawl actually has or had completed the numbers calculations based for that, for the spring index at that point.
Okay. Thanks. I follow up, and I saw in the text that there wasn't any, she did not have latest catch information. Do we know what's happening with commercial landings relative to state and federal waters in comparison to the federal ACLs and the state waters assumptions that they used in their specification setting? Seems to me that's important information that the board ought to have before they try to go through their specification process, our specification process.
I believe they were not ready at that point because of the difficulty of splitting out. Basically, the problem with this is obviously trying to attribute landings to different stocks. So we have not yet been able to split out state and federal landings to the appropriate stock levels at the time that we discussed this.
David Simpson. You pass. Bill Amler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The technical committee's report indicated for Southern New England that the 1676 metric tons be maintained, and is that for federal and or state? And then the second part, but it says the state waters subcomponent will be reduced. Why would the state subcomponent be reduced and not the other section?
So the state water subcomponent is actually not part of the ACL, so it's not subject to accountability measures. It's technically a set aside based on the amount of catch from previous recent years.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Well, yes, but I mean, if they want the subcomponent of the state subcomponent to be reduced, why are they saying that that should be reduced and not everywhere?
Go ahead, Paul.
Every year, the groundfish plan team goes through all the different components for the ABCs. We try to figure out, we have to account for all the different subcomponents, and depending on what happened in the past, we're changed those percentages. So we're actually going to do this tomorrow at the PDT meeting. We don't know yet if they're going to be, I think Sarah was saying they're going to go down, but I'm not sure yet. We haven't really reviewed it yet. But basically, we're going to figure that out. Since the state catch was fairly low, those percentages might get adjusted lower.
Right. To clarify, the TC did not recommend that the ACL be lowered. We're saying that we expect that it will be lowered by the feds based on this analysis.
David?
Thanks. So what Paul was just saying raised a question in my mind. If the state water sub-ACL, essentially set aside, is reduced, does that necessarily mean that even more catch will be allowed in federal waters?
I guess if the ABC doesn't change, that wouldn't go up.
So it will make a bad problem worse.
If they catch the federal ABC, which hasn't been happening.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to repeat everything I said at the last meeting, but as you know, as everyone around the table knows, I have great dissatisfaction and a good case of heartburn relative to this plan. And I'll just kind of quickly go through my list. The surveys are at time series lows and declining. And yet we have, in essence, a harvest strategy that is a constant catch scenario that's not going to be revised probably for 2 years. The biomass is at 16% of the BMSY target and may be declining. We have two completely different approaches. The state waters, basically, particularly Mass and Rhode Island, they're essentially closed, 50-pound limit. And that limit is promoting regulatory discard. So we tell people in state waters, go catch your 50 pounds and then railroad them over the side. This isn't doing anything for the resource. On the other hand, on the other side of the line, on the 3-mile limit, we're essentially allocating the resource to sectors. They can target them. It's not a bycatch fishery. It's a targeted fishery where some of the boats can land 5,000 pounds. So it raises all kinds of equity issues in my own mind. But the fundamental reason I'm raising this, there's no evidence that I can find in any of the documents that we're rebuilding the population or that rebuilding has been initiated or that the catch targets are set appropriately. We need a dialogue desperately with the New England Council on reconciling who catches what percent should get caught in state waters and what portion should get caught in federal waters. And we've got to start that process. I don't think we can wait 2 or 3 years and just let this become another Gulf of Maine cod situation. Thank you.
Bill? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whether the federal fisheries reduces their ABC or not, the point is, it sounds like for southern New England, that the council has got, as I think Dave brought up, like a 5,000-pound landing, and the state has a 50-pound landing. Now, every time that the federal people go down in their quota and we disagree, we change our mind and go with them. Now, if they raise their quota to whatever they have it at, or their landing, whatever they have it at, how come we don't change ours and go with the feds at that point? We only seem to go with them when they go down. And I share Mr. Cavallo's idea and concerns, and David's, that it just seems to be unfair that the state waters people are bound by 50 while the federal people are allowed to 5,000 or whatever, even if they go down more. But I mean, the point is that it just seems very unequal and unfair. And I just had to get that on the record.
Mark?
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate some of the points that David made and add another one. And we did ask for that dialogue to begin, and I'm not aware that this commission, the commission leadership, I think it's specified right in your minutes, ever initiated that dialogue. I know that we participate on the NRCS, in terms of stock assessment priorities and so on, but I never saw any correspondence that went to the council chair to initiate that dialogue. One of the reasons last year I was trying to increase the commercial possession limit to 50 to 100 pounds was not only because of the equity issues that Jerry Cavallo spoke to very well and David has spoke to, but we also did something for recreational fishermen, left state waters fishermen high and dry, but I thought it was important as well to continue the data stream and continue the catch record of the states. Because you can see now that what will happen is through no action by this commission, the state waters commercial fishery will just be slowly strangled out of existence by the federal specification process, and our lack of attainment of the catch assumptions that they make in their specification process. You're going to have a total ABC. They're going to take out what they think they need to take out. That's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy if we neglected to go to a more equitable possession limit. We didn't catch as much as they estimated, so more will flow out of a constant ABC to the other side of the ledger. So I agree with David. We're in a difficult problem here. I'm in a weaker position of arguing today because of the abundance indices, particularly the NEMAP one, which I think is devastating. That was a survey that is highly regarded. It's in the intermediary zone, and the last two data points indicate a major change in abundance. But I just continue to point to this problem. There needs to be a more cooperative winter flounder management program between the Commission and the Council. Thank you.
Question for Tony, would the correct procedure be a request from this board or the policy board to forward a letter to the council?
That would be the correct procedure. And I just wanted to update the board that we have had some discussions with the New England Council as sidebar discussions at NRCC, Bob and I have, and we had planned on having folks from the council come to this meeting because we thought that the council would have set the specifications through their process, but due to the COD emergency that the council went through, emergency I would call it, at this last meeting, the winter flounder specifications were delayed, and so we did not have anybody from the council come to today's meeting since they hadn't discussed it. So that was one of the ways that we were trying to improve communication between the council and the commission, but we can definitely send a letter looking for more collaborative and cooperative management programs to address these issues.
Would there be any objection to that letter going forward? Okay, David, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so just to clarify, I need a memory refresh. When federal waters fishery went from no possession to a very substantial, for the size of this stock, ACL, was that an action of the New England Council or was that an action of NOAA?
Paul, you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me go through the history a little bit. All the winter flounder assessments were done at SAR 52. We didn't update the Southern New England assessment here because in the meantime, a new rebuilding plan was put in place for the Southern New England stock. That's when that bump up came, right, in that ABC. However, that's still based on that same assessment, which is getting fairly old at this point. So all these changes we see in the surveys now are not incorporated into that number. Next summer, we're supposed to be updating all 20 groundfish assessments, and then that information will come into the process. So,
Doug?
Paul,
go ahead and do a follow-up.
Paul just answered my question.
Okay, so I know that we gave ourselves another 10 years to achieve the rebuilding. So my specific question is, did NOAA do that or did the New England Council do that? I mean, that was a mechanism for upping landings of winter flounder. We'll give ourselves another 10 years. That means we can fish harder now. Was that NOAA's decision, or was that a recommendation of the New England Council?
Well, I mean, NOAA allowed a redone of the rebuilding plan because under the original one, it was an F of 0. You couldn't get there. So the rebuilding plan was redone.
David, are you trying to get at where the letter should go? Is that?
Yeah, my impression has been, and I may be wrong, my impression is this is something NOAA did to mitigate groundfish problems throughout New England and southern New England, principally in Massachusetts, because most of the southern New England winter flounder are landed in Massachusetts. And I'm trying to figure out, right, who does the letter go to? I didn't think our problem was as much a New England Council action as it was an almost unilateral NOAA action. And you can see from those indices, and as Mark Gibson pointed out, as short as the NEMAP time series is, it has a couple of years before this change in harvest was initiated and a couple of years after, and you can see the disastrous consequences of it. So here we are as a commission with a species that spawns in local waters, spends a lot of time in local waters, and is getting grossly overfished for the size of the stock in federal waters, and we're frustrated in terms of how do we deal with that? Do we just throw up our hands and say, well, let's make sure we protect our state waters ACL. Let's jack up our trip limits right now because the feds are going to take it all. That's kind of where we are with this, and it's not the direction I want to go. What I'd like to do is get the federal fisheries management back in line with what the commission is doing and try to salvage this stock and begin rebuilding because it's in really rough shape.
Doug, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just to help clarify things, and Dr. Pierce can confirm this for me, but one of the other things that happened was when the commission, when the council went to catch shares, remember originally it was a zero possession fishery. And then based on the revised time frame, they then made it an allocated fishery, and that's when between the combination of a new 10-year rebuilding time frame and then going to an allocated fishery where we started getting into these large catches. So it's really, to me, a combination of both what the council did and what NOAA Fisheries obviously has ultimately the final approval of any of these actions. The other thing that I think will be of notice that Paul had mentioned that this is going to be updated this coming year, which is another problem that the SSC has been battling with, is having old assessments with which to make projections. Clearly, once you get beyond 2 or 3 years, your projections are very weak, and so having a new assessment should help this. And if you look at some of the survey indices, you'd expect that potentially the ABCs for the southern New England stock would probably go down.
So, Doug, are you saying then that the council is the right place to...
I would send it to both.
Terry?
Certainly the agency participates on the council. So if a letter goes to the council, it will also address the agency. Just to follow through to your question, David, is that despite the council's preoccupation with Gulf of Maine cod the last number of months, the specifications for next year are going out in Framework 53, which is voted on at the end of November. The Groundfish Committee meets in 2 weeks. My suggestion would be that a letter goes to the to the council so that Groundfish Committee can consider action during their discussions for whatever the final vote's going to be, final action in November.
David Pierce?
Yes, the letter should go to both the regional administrator as well as the council, and we should all reflect as well on the nature in which groundfish is managed by the New England Council. I'm on the groundfish committee. I've been involved, of course, in groundfish management for many years, and on the winter flounder board, obviously. We have to remember that the industry's perspective, especially states, waters, fishermen's perspective, is a good one and an understandable one. And when trip limits are increased, as was done for southern New England, mid-Atlantic winter flounder back in July, increased from 2,000 pounds per trip to 6,000 pounds per trip. That was done for the common pool vessels. And of course, we've got the distinction between commercial sector and common pool vessels on the screen in front of us. There are relatively few vessels in the common pool. Most vessels are sector vessels, uninhibited by trip limits. They're restricted by so-called ACEs, allocations to the sector of that stock of winter flounder. And so they have to live with their specific sector allocation, but there are no trip limits. Common pool vessels have trip limits. And according to the announcement that was put out back earlier this year, because the small amount of allocation for common pool vessels was expected not to be taken, the service increased the trip limit up to 6,000 pounds, giving common pool vessels an opportunity to catch their total allocation for the year. No consideration of what's going on in state waters. It was just common pool vessels. What are you allocated? All right. Your limit is increased, so you can take that allocation, small as it is, but we're increasing it. And then the announcement said that if indeed catch becomes too high, the trip limits can be reduced down. So there's our dilemma as a board, as an ASMFC board, having to deal with the trip limits that are established for common pool vessels. They're relatively few, but still there are some. Trip limits for those vessels, enabling them to catch their allocation for the year as a group versus what has been set aside as a subcomponent for states waters fishing. And we can argue that the subcomponent is wrong. I suspect it is wrong. Nevertheless, it exists. And this board is expected by the council, by the service, to live within that subcomponent by taking the necessary actions to do so. But we're faced with this obvious inequity that's been highlighted by a number of people, such as those from Rhode Island. And I've yet to be able to figure out a way to wrestle with this and to resolve it, because we have federal management that basically dominates, with common pool vessels consistently having an advantage over states waters fishermen because there is a specific allocation for common pool vessels, and then this subcomponent that's relatively small for states waters vessels. So I don't like the situation for states waters vessels, and sure, I'd like to see another way to address it, but as it stands right now, this is the way it is. And there really are very few options for this board to take, except to express displeasure, write a letter to the service and to the council, but I suspect the response that we get back is going to be no more than what I just provided as a description of the way it is.
Tom Foti.
I've been very silent because I was waiting until we got to the comment period after we finished with the technical, asking questions with technical, but this is wind up in a discussion. And since we wound it up in a discussion, I sent some tables over to Melissa, and maybe let's put those tables up. Linda Barry put these together for us for the state. And it basically shows the jump and catch in New Jersey in 2013. But what I found interesting is the spring troll figures. Okay. That's the catch, how it jumped up last year. Now, our in-state water fishery, commercial fishery, is about 7,000 pounds for the last couple of years. And in 2012, the recreational fishery, according to MERS or MREPS, or whatever you want to call it, I don't agree with the number since it said 40 fish, and we went from like 36,000 to 40 fish, but I won't use that. But if you go down to the other set of tables on there, it's interesting to look what happened in the spring winter troll fishery in 2014. Maybe Tom can explain it better than me.
Well, Tom, you want to comment on that?
Sure, thank you.
For 2014, basically through the time series, it's always the April troll survey, and there was always that bimodal, this is a mean catch at length, so there's always a bimodal length distribution. And sort of lost it in 2013, and in 2014 you see it more, but that's more of a less availability of the larger fish. And again, this, you know, obviously it's a survey indices, and it does have, the bag is, there's a liner in the bag, so we do get all the smaller fish. So basically we're catching more of the younger fish because of the less availability of the larger fish.
So I'll just finish up my comment, is that if you look at that, you realize what we did in 2013 is wipe out all the big fish that would be coming into spawn, and, you know, the problem's even getting worse. I mean, it's totally inequitable. I mean, I've said that before. I agree with everything that Rhode Island said, everything that Massachusetts said, and a few other people have said. This is not the way we're supposed to be managing. I mean, it's interesting because I made the motion a couple of years ago when we were sitting here discussing about a total moratorium because the stocks were basically in such bad shape. And I said, well, why don't we leave it one fish or two fish, and we went to two fish, and at least leave the flight net fishermen or the inshore guys so they don't do discards, to basically leave them with 50 pounds, which in our state I think works out to 36 fish. I mean, so it kept a little, you know, regulatory discards at a minimum. And here we now open up the fishery for 5,000 pounds. After, in 2012, we had a moratorium in the EEZ. I mean, this is not good fisheries management. It's not a good relationship between the National Marine Fisheries Service and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. Now, somebody asked how we can get around this. Well, when we basically wanted to do a different summer flounder quota than the National Marine Fisheries Service, they threatened to shut the EEZ down for the harvest of commercial fishermen out in the EEZ. There's nothing stopping us from closing all the landings of the ports to these 5,000-pound trip limits and play a little catch-up game one way or the other. I know that's not going to work. It's not a sensible way to do this. But we could say in state waters you can't land any more than 50 pounds. So I don't know what you do catching winter flounder if you can't land them from Maine to New Jersey. So it'll make an interesting situation, and maybe that's my only recommendation. Chris, from what I've been listening to, it's the only thing we have available. We can't tell the National Marine Fisheries. They can tell us what to do. They've done it numerous times, whether it's black sea bass, scub, or summer flounder. When we think a fishery is in disastrous shape and should be closed completely, almost, we're seeing this go on. So, I don't know. It seems like you speak out of both sides of your mouth.
David Simpson?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion, actually, that the board requests that the policy board approve a letter directed to the New England Fishery Management Council and NOAA Fisheries, urging they reduce possession limits to bycatch levels only for all federally permitted vessels, and that those limits be based on sea sampling data for fisheries for trips targeting species other than winter flounder. In other words, you know, the Commission for Southern New England has set a 50-pound bycatch limit. You'll recall that at that time, NOAA was urging that we allow no possession consistent with their plan. We saw that as a wasteful practice, and we allowed 50 pounds to avoid that wastage. I'd like to see NOAA and the New England Council take a similar approach, understanding the level of discards may be a little bit higher in federal waters, allow bycatch for that, but nothing more. We want to prevent a directed fishery on this stock, given its depleted status.
Is there a second to the motion? Doug Grout? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, do you want a minute to caucus?
I like through the chair to ask.
Hang on, Tom. Is that the motion, David? David, is that it?
That's it, thanks.
Thank you. The seconder would like to speak to the motion?
My question about the motion that I seconded, does this apply to Southern New England, or does it apply to all stocks, Gulf of Maine, Georges Bank, and Southern New England?
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is specific to the Southern New England Mid-Atlantic stock.
Tom Fody, I do not.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what this actually means, and that's what I don't know. It says allow for bycatch. Can you determine what the numbers are going to be bycatch? Because I've heard bycatch numbers wind up being 5,000 pounds over the years. And we have formulas that we create for this, so will this really do any good? And I don't know. And that's what I'm asking the question. I want to vote for a motion and then find out that we allow for 5,000 pound bycatch figures. So I'm trying to figure out what it actually means, Dave.
I think I have Dave Borden next. No, or was it Mark? And then.
Just apply just to the common pool vessels? Because that's the first question I have. What happens to the sector allocations that, as David pointed out, are not subject to possession limits based on allocation to the sectors and sector management? We don't have an updated stock assessment for this stock yet, so I don't think the council is going to react to any changes until they have an updated stock assessment in hand and are actually going through either a new specs package or a framework action to adjust, winter flounder measures. Just not the letter that I was looking for. It's not the one I don't think we talked about at our last board meeting. So I'd like to know some more about it, but I think I'm opposed to it at this point, the way it's written.
David, you want to respond to those questions?
Yeah, and I'll say I hesitated a bit in making the motion because of the complexities of sector management and all that. Because of the complexities of sector management. My intention is that this apply to all vessels, including sector vessels. I think that could be, we just can't have a directed fishery on this stock, no matter what the current rules are. They can't, maybe the possession limit needs to be 0 for sectors if that's what the law, if the law is that restrictive. But we cannot have 5,000 pound trips on winter flounder. It can't support the stock. The stock can't support that, and whether you're a sector vessel or a common pool vessel, this idea of targeting this very weak stock is going to hurt us in the end. And we don't need a stock assessment to see the situation this resource is in. And it's a common problem that New England has, is they don't get the updates and stock assessments every year the way we do with fluke, scup, sea bass. If summer flounder assessment comes in 3 months late, we're up in arms about it. The New England Council goes for years managing blind. But my intention is to get federal management back in line with state management. They pushed us very hard to get us in line with them, and I think it's time that we turn around and ask for the same kind of restraint in federal waters that we were expected to apply in state waters.
Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was answered by Dave just now, but I do think we need to do something to work on an equity balance here. I know it's a difficult situation, but we have to be forceful, I think, in relaying what our constituents are saying to us. It's just not working out, and the risk of losing a state fishery is unacceptable. We just need to continue to work with the council and NOAA fisheries to create some solution.
David Pierce.
I think Mark Gibson is probably right regarding what the council response will be. I'm a council member, so I'm not sure how I'm going to respond, except at this point in time, I think the motion makes sense, especially in light of what's required in state waters and the inequity that we do have. And if nothing else, this would send a message to the New England Council that from what we know regarding the status of Southern New England Mid-Atlantic winter flounder, more needs to be done in federal waters. Unrestricted fishing on winter flounder, notably, is inappropriate through sector fishing, for example.
High limits for the common pool vessels also seems inappropriate. And if nothing else, this will stimulate some debate and some analysis by the groundfish plan development team. And I think, Paul, you're on the plan development team. I can see him squirming in the seat right now. We will be getting, I would hope, some analysis regarding the last part of this motion that talks about based on sea sampling data for trips targeting other species. That's a real tough nut to get through, and it's an important analysis for winter flounder as well as other stocks too, groundfish stocks. So I'll support the motion, if for no other reason than it gets the ball moving at the New England Council and highlights this board's very significant concern, important concern about what's happening to this important resource.
David Borden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can support the motion, but to be candid, I have some reservations about it. And we really need a parallel effort at the leadership level to open up the dialogue between the commission leadership and the council leadership and NIMS on figuring out a way forward here and basically present it at a subsequent meeting so we can consider it. I think Dr. Pierce is 100% correct. This will promote an interesting dialogue with the technical people, given the fact that we're harvesting this resource under a constant catch scenario. I would hope that the technical people would look at all these indices of abundance that are falling like a stone and go back and see how that compares to the projections that were made to generate the 16,075 metric ton quota, and my guess is that if they do that, they'll find out there's a complete disconnect. But so I'll support it with reservations. Thank you.
Any other comments from board members? Seeing none, I'm going to have Bud comment, and then I'll open up to the public.
I would think the board would consider including the Gulf of Maine stock in this motion. We're in the same boat up there.
Anybody from the public like to comment in this motion? Seeing none, do you need a minute to caucus? We'll do 1 minute caucus. Okay, I'll read the motion. The board recommends the ISFMP Policy Board to send a letter to the New England Fisheries Management Council and NOAA Fisheries urging a reduction in southern New England mid-Atlantic winter flounder possession limit to bycatch limits only for federal vessels based on sea sampling data for trips targeting other species. Motion by David Simpson, seconded by Doug Grout. All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed? Okay, nulls, abstentions. Okay, motion passed. 6. I'm sorry.
Just a comment after the motion, now that the motion is finished. Following up on Dave Borden's point, I think it makes some sense for me to reach out to Tom Neese as the executive director of the New England Council, and I'll do that and work with Terry and the other leadership folks to figure out some different options for moving forward, and we'll bring those back hopefully at the February meeting, unless there's any objection by the board for me to do that.
So are you suggesting that in addition to the letter or in lieu of the letter? In addition to the letter?
In addition.
Okay, yep, no, I think that makes complete sense. Yes. (6101). Okay, next agenda item, advisory panel. They had a telephone conference call, and Bud is here to report on it.
We had a conference call. People from New Jersey, New York, New Hampshire, and Maine participated. We had 1 commercial fisherman and 4 rec fishermen. We didn't come to a consensus opinion on anything, so I will note what each state said. In New Jersey, they were not catching their limits and basically want to have specifications in the states follow the reductions that are anticipated at the federal level, although this past motion may change that. Then Massachusetts, in New York, there was a discussion about some research going on by Stony Brook, I believe it is, where they're finding inbreeding in the genetic pool. The numbers are way down. That state reiterated their position there should not be a directed fishery on winter flounder. New Hampshire, we had a commercial and a recreational member. The recreational member also recommended that there not be any directed fishery because the catches are so low. The commercial fisherman's point of view is actually pretty interesting. He's participating in a sonic tag study which raises some questions about life history information on winter flounder, in that the null hypothesis going into the project was that the fish spawned in estuaries, but in fact they gated off. You can have electronic gates to see if tags pass through into rivers, and only a couple of fish actually went into the estuary, and they found that they were all breeding on hard sand. That totally corresponds to my life experience of looking at winter flounder, where all the breeding fish I saw were always on hard sand in front of my house. And finally, my position remains the same. There should not be a directed fishery in the Gulf of Maine, and I'm kind of disappointed that there wasn't a motion, that wasn't included in the motion. I have done my personal surveys up and down the coast, and we still only see fish caught in the lower extreme part of the state and the upper extreme. I saw way lower numbers this year of juvenile fish in the area that I personally monitor. And I happen to be working on permitting a breakwater in Mount Desert in Southwest Harbor, and we just did a 2-day intensive diving survey on over an acre of habitat and saw one 4-inch or 10-centimeter winter flounder. And so individually, we still remain thinking that the stock is in terrible shape, and that's my report.
Thank you, Bud. Next, I'm sorry, any questions for Bud? Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you're saying basically that the advisory panel recommends a moratorium on fishing in southern New England?
We only had 2 participants, and we did not take a consensus opinion. I simply expressed the opinion of the New York advisor. The New Jersey advisor just wanted a reduction. And then the 2 recreational advisors in the Gulf of Maine stock both want a moratorium, but we have no position as a panel. We had done that last year. It went nowhere, so we didn't bother.
Any further questions? Tom?
But you think the lack of participation was due to the frustration of what happened last year and what happened with opening up the EEZ? I'm just curious because you had such low participation this year. And I think you've had better participation over the years.
It was the same people with one addition as we had last year. I believe that the lack of participation by both commercial and recreational fishermen is just they've given up. No one I know in Maine goes after winter flounder anymore. And I think that's probably true pretty much everywhere. But it's really no change in participants. I know we put out a call last year for the states to put advisors on, and I don't know what the status is. Maybe Melissa can speak to that.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none. I think that's going to be, that's an agenda item later in the meeting. The next agenda item is setting the 2015 fishing year specifications, and there may be a good reason to delay this till February, and Tony was going to speak to that.
Yeah, I'll speak to it. Okay, so upon hearing, the TC report and AP report, and knowing that the council has not had a chance to make a decision on the SSC's recommendation on ABC, it would be a good way to go to save this decision for the winter meeting, and upon hearing the council's decision and what they approve upon the SSC's recommendations for the ABC.
Is there anyone that disagrees with delaying this till the February meeting? Tom?
I'm trying to figure out a reason why we would delay the reason, because that means we're waiting on the New England Council to do their work, and then we're going to adjust our specs on what they're doing, or I don't think anybody around this table wants to change our specs from where it is now, or maybe we just lowered it, but I don't see how it's going to affect New England. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why we're going to delay. Or are you going to adjust upward? If New England does what they did last year, are we going to adjust upward? I don't think anybody around this table wants to do that. So I'm trying to figure out the reason why.
Well, there's a possibility of going in the other direction, Tom, of going lower. That's the largest reason for delaying. Yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, so if it does go downward and following what the AP member in New York suggested, or New Jersey, where the recommendation was to reduce the bag limit accordingly, it would be good to have that information in advance and for the TC to review the information and recommend the appropriate adjustment.
Follow up, Tom?
I'm trying to think how I'm going to reduce the commercial fishery from 36 fish down to nothing, or 50 pounds a day, 36 fish, to nothing more than that, where it's still going on in the EEZ, and I don't see that happening. I mean, I'm just not sure what we're going to do. I mean, also, we're at, 2 fish recreationally, so we could drop it to 1 fish like weak fish, which doesn't seem to be doing any good or increasing the stock, so I'm not sure.
Terry?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were just 2 recent operational assessments on Georges Bank and Gulf of Maine cod that the SSC reviewed early last week. Paul made his presentation. I mean, the summary of at least my take-home summary is the updated biomass estimates are lower. Given these status changes, I mean, part of Framework 53 are going to be consideration of changing the specs for both Gulf of Maine and Georges Bank. So my sense is that it would be the proper thing for us to do to delay until winter meeting.
Any other comments on that? Mark?
I guess I don't mind waiting till the next meeting, but have some trepidation about what might come out of that meeting in terms of the order specifications with then a limited amount of time for states to go through their administrative procedures process for a May 1 start fishing year. So you may have some states that will need more time than May 1 to get something done if there are substantive changes from what we have right now.
My sense would be that we're probably looking at status quo if we vote on something today. Well, that's probably what you're going to have in February until something changes. So it's I don't see that you're not risking anything by waiting would be my judgment. But, David?
Yeah, I would also suggest that it would be a poor negotiating skill to make our decision right now. The points that were made early on in this conversation about the feds were already thinking, well, we can reduce the state waters sub-ACL because after all, they're not using it. I think I'd like to have a conversation with the federal partners, still holding out our decision. We could, after all, decide that maybe we do want 500 or 1,000 pound trip limits and open up the recreational fishery a little bit more for parity with the federal plan. I think that needs to stay on the table as just a smart negotiating position.
Any other comments? Seeing none, then it seems like there would be very little opposition to waiting till February. So unless there's a motion, that's what we will proceed with. Last agenda item is review of the advisory panel membership. Melissa.
So again, for the advisory panel membership, New Hampshire has nominated, has a nomination for a new AP member.
Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to nominate David Gaethel to the advisory panel. Dave is a former council member, a longtime commercial and party boat fisherman. He brings a lot of experience, and obviously he's participated in cooperative research here, so I think he's going to be a big asset to the AP.
A second. Rip. Any objection to the motion? Seeing none, David's a new advisory panel member. Thank you. We have other business, an additional agenda item. Melissa?
The TC requests a change to the compliance report due date. Currently, it is due November 1st, and they would like to change it to December 1st in order to provide more time to prepare landings data for the report. Thank you.
Any objection to that change of date? Seeing none, that will be changed. Any additional business coming before this board? Seeing none, motion to adjourn. Bill Adler. Board's adjourned.
Thanks, Richie. We'll get the EO board started in about 10 minutes. Thank you.